You're listening to the Hello World Podcast, number 38. My name is Sean Wildemuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World Podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business and the decisions they made along the way. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. On today's show, I have Stephen Forte. Stephen is the Chief Strategy Officer at the venture-backed company Telerik, a leading vendor of developer and team productivity tools. He's the founder and director of Mach 5, a Silicon Valley-based accelerator, and co-founder of AcceleratorHK, Hong Kong's first startup accelerator. Stephen is a Certified Scrum Master, a Certified Scrum Professional, a PMP, and also regularly speaks at industry conferences around the world. He has written several books on application and database development and has an MBA from the City University of New York. Stephen is also the member of the Scrum Alliance, an avid mountain climber, and leads a trek in the Mount Everest region every fall to raise money for charity. After several years as an expat in Hong Kong, Stephen now lives in Silicon Valley with his wife. On today's show, Stephen and I talk a lot about entrepreneurship and what it takes and what it means. He talks about his start with a non-computer science degree and how that led him into building database applications. We also talk about his role in a number of startup as well as successful exits of several companies. Let's take a listen. Well, today's show I'm very excited about. I have the illustrious Stephen Forte on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm great. So you do this trip to up into Tibet every year. Is it Tibet? Do I have that right?
Yeah, but almost right. It's Nepal, next to Tibet.
Nepal. Oh, right, because you can't probably get into Tibet.
The people who live there are Tibetan, though, the Sherpa people. So that's a common mistake people make.
Okay. Yeah. And it's a long walk up, I hear.
It's a few weeks, actually. We usually leave Kathmandu and fly to a very crazy little airport that if you YouTube the world's most dangerous airport, you'll see the airport's called Lukla. The runway is almost a 90-degree angle, so you're landing uphill.
Wow.
It's even more frightening taking off because you're going downhill.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that hill is a 3,000-foot drop, so a 1,000-meter drop. So, but we do the trek. It's probably about 2 to 3 weeks, and depending on the routes we take each year. And it's usually all helping to raise money for a charity in Nepal for schools in a rural area where the Sherpas are from.
And you help build schools when you're there as well. It's not just about the money, right?
Correct. I did that 1 year, and it's like Habitat for Humanity style, going off into the mountains and building the school. And I realized I'm much better at raising money than building a school. But
you're not the only. Yeah,
I had to, hammer things together and all that fun stuff. And it was a wonderful experience, but it was hard. It was hard work.
Is it still standing? I mean,
apparently, yes.
Oh, good. Because I've never doubted your architectural skills. When it comes down to nails and stuff, you never know.
Well, we brought a bunch of tech geeks from our circles. And what was interesting about it is that everyone came back and said the same thing. Like, is it still standing? But we also brought up a general contractor with us, like a guy who does this stuff for a living. Yeah. So we let him kind of tell us what to do.
Nice.
And supervise.
That's funny.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the podcast is about how you got started. So, did you start as a little geek, or were you did you get started in college?
So in college, I was a social science guy. I was history, political science, economics. And I always were into video games and working, doing geeky things, but I never did it professionally.
Interesting.
And I'll tell you, the joke is, I'll tell you the story how I got into technology, because I think that's exactly the scope here. And
exactly the scope. No scope creep.
Well, technology professionally. So I've always been interested in playing, video games, as I said, and, hacking around on the computer and, quite frankly, Commodore 64 days pirating video games, right?
Really? I never did that. Just on record, that never happened.
Never.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, before there was BitTorrent, there was the dual floppy drive,
Yep.
right? A trick. Anyway, I was on Wall Street because that's what you do with a social science degree. I did Wall Street for a year, and I got a promotion into IT because I knew the difference between save and save as. And this was thanks to Castle Wolfenstein, right? I would always save my game, save as Steve test 1, Steve test 2, because I always was chicken that I would not do well on that level.
And go back and be able to restart it because you went down the wrong corridor.
Exactly. So this is about 20 years ago, my first job out of university, and the boss calls me in because I was like the tech guy in the department. And he goes, can you help me recover documents? But you can't look at them because they're people's employee reviews. I said, sure. And he said that he wrote like the whole department's reviews up and he kept hitting save. And what he did is he pulled up a Word document and just typed in the review, hit save, and then just typed over it and hit save again. And I explained to him the difference between save and save as. And he goes, okay, you have to go into the tech department. He goes, you're on the wrong career. So I haven't actually had much interaction with him over the years, but he really did help me make a career choice. So,
that's interesting. To be perfectly honest, I think that's still a skill that you might want to do a little YouTube video and let people know how it works, because I still get calls from, I can't really tell you who I get calls from, but that are a little confused by the difference. So what happened then?
I did go into IT, and they, at that point they had me automate, they called it systems analysis, which was at the time the equivalent maybe of what a PM does today at a company like a Google or a Microsoft, right? And PM being a program manager or a product manager, not a project manager.
Right.
And so systems analyst was the title back then in the early 90s. And the first thing I did was automate a credit analyst system where I had to do all the analysis on the analysis, and I forget what it was. We were dumping things from the mainframe and had to do automated credit checks on them. So it was really data feeds. Like if RESTful services and APIs exist, I could have wrote the system in an hour.
Right.
But that stuff didn't exist back in 1994.
Because you had to parse all these flat files and then do magic with them and all that.
And then get the flat file ready for an upload to a third-party service. And then the data had to come back, and then we had to parse those files and then upload into the mainframe. So there were many of these data handoffs where today it would be done in real time with a web call, right, with a web service.
Or worse with ETL. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And ETL actually, by comparison, isn't that bad.
No, not in comparison. So, were you actually getting your hands dirty, or were you working with the development teams, building this stuff?
I was actually getting my hands dirty. So I was working with the development team as much as they would give me. And there was this guy, again, I don't talk to him all that much today. His name was John Starr. And if he's listening out there, he had a great effect on my career 20 years ago. He took me under his wing. He taught me at the time, it was Visual Basic 3.0.
Nice.
It was probably about 1995, and the Jet database engine compatibility layer. And there was this other guy, I forget his name, Ronald something, and he was the C++ guy. And back then, he spent 2 or 3 months building a grid. And it's ironic, right? Because today I work at Telerik, and we're famous for our grid. It's like, just go buy the grid from a Telerik. Well, Telerik's didn't exist 20 years ago, but Sheridan did. Sheridan did, but they didn't have a grid. Sheridan today is in Logistics, right? But and back then, the Sheridan controls, but they didn't have a grid back in like 94, 95. So we built a grid ourselves. The trials and tribulations.
Because everything, especially back then, hopefully not anymore, but was all grid-based development. Everything happened in a grid because it felt like Excel.
Exactly. Especially on Wall Street, right? With all the financial data.
Or I should say Lotus 1, 2, 3, but whichever.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that project went through. You built all this VB3 code, and did you get the bug for development somewhere in there? I mean, was that something you really thought, "Oh, this is the world I want to be in," and set it back on Wall Street?
Well, what happened? Yes, I started getting interested in software, but to be honest, writing code didn't excite me. At first. And to be honest, what really did is they then gave me a project with Access. And at the time, this is Access 1.0 or 2.0. I forget, no, 1.1. And I don't even know if I don't know if they're revving Access anymore, at least from a development side. But back then, Access was really a developer product. It wasn't even part of Office yet. It was a light developer product.
I purchased it with cash. I went
with cash.
I went and bought, it was $100 at probably was a pirated copy, to be perfectly honest with you, but
we won't tell anyone.
I don't know that it was pirated, but some little computer guy had certain Microsoft products for, it seemed a little too little, but I went and paid $100 cash because I thought this is going to be the thing. And in some ways it was.
And in some ways it was, because what happened is we needed to get a bunch of data from flat files, Excel files, and do these heterogeneous data calculations, which were just impossible because we got data from a mainframe, data from Excel, and data from quote elsewhere, which was really, manually entered in by somebody. So I had to go out and build a form for somebody. And that was like coding in VB3, so no big deal. But it was actually learning data. And I read a book by Ken Getz and Mike Gilbert and Paul Litwin called, I think it was the Access Developer's Handbook. And there was a chapter in there by Paul Litwin, which is funny because I'll mention him in a minute, about just the relational model. I was never exposed to it in school, right? Remember, I was poli-sci, history, economics, and I learned about like first normal form, EF cod and all that great stuff. And I was on fire. Like it was like it was like I was in university again, just absorbing knowledge. And I redid my database to be all properly normalized, and honestly, never looked back. From there, I became a data geek, went out and got, Oracle DBA certifications and, eventually Sybase, which then eventually became Microsoft SQL Server and always coded big systems that were data intensive. So then I, haven't written C++ code or C code so that was in the early 90s. And then the next time I wrote C code was 19 years later, which is last year when I purchased an Arduino.
That's funny. So I think of you as having this sort of entrepreneurial spirit that you helped build some early phase companies as well. Do I have that right?
You are correct. After about 2 years and in the IT group at Fidelity, this was now about, maybe it was a year in. It started for the wrong reasons.
Always does.
I would love to say, right, that I was born with this. Well, I definitely have an entrepreneurial zeal since a kid. I mean, we don't need to go talk about some of the crazy, things I did, between, a little more advanced than a lemonade stand, but not much. But I always had that flavor in me. Yeah. But getting into, you would think that people, start companies because they wanted to change the world. I started a company because Fidelity wouldn't let me use Windows 95.
That says it all, doesn't it?
It really does. I was able to get on the Windows 95 beta. I forget how. It probably had something to do with being at Fidelity in the IT group, but I talked my way into it and no one else wanted to represent us or whatever it was. And after like 6 months or a year of playing with it, I had one machine at the office with it. I actually illegally probably put it on my machine at home. I gave it to I was renting an apartment in Brooklyn with three other college buddies. They were all running it and we were the coolest kids on the block. I mean, you have to remember Windows 95 is a lot like a Mac today. Like it was the coolest thing in town. Yeah. This is 20 years ago. I know people that are in their 20s today can't fathom that Microsoft once was cool, but early 90s they were. And
especially compared to what else was going on.
Correct. I mean, like OS2 or, DOS, right? Yeah. So long story short is I was at home, testing this, and then I'm using like the 32-bit programming languages like Visual Basic 4. Yeah, 4. VB4 had a 16-bit and a 32-bit version. So I was learning the 32-bit version. I was playing with it and I just wanted to be modern and use this stuff. And I realized that Fidelity said, well, we'll move probably around 1998. Right. It's in 3 years. And to me, that was unacceptable. I said, well, I want to write code, using VB and Oracle and SQL Server and Access and all the 32-bit versions of this stuff. And I want to write code for that today. So I started a consulting company probably about 1995. And it's still pretty entrepreneurial. I was self-employed and I worked by the hour, and I did that for about 3 or 4 years.
And you had to pay Brooklyn rent. So, I mean, that That was a risky venture.
Back then, Brooklyn wasn't as cool. I did everything before it was cool, right? Like I did entrepreneurship before it was cool. I did Brooklyn before it was cool. So I don't know what that means, but
that you're a technology hipster. That's what that means.
I don't have the beard though.
Not yet. There's still time.
So about 3-4 years, I ran a very successful consulting company. I did it for 3 or 4 years. I eventually had about 5 guys working with me. And, one of them I would consider a partner. The other 3 were kind of staff.
Sure.
And eventually we were able to sell, start getting into product. And every consultant thinks they can do it. And I saw it then, and I see it now at Telerik being a product company.
Yeah.
And we actually did successfully sell a product. And ironically, who we sold it to is someone who's a little bit famous today in entrepreneurial circles. You may or may not have heard of her because she's on a TV show called Shark Tank, Barbara Corcoran.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny. We sold some IP to her real estate company, and one of my guys went with her. And this is the first time we learned about the concept of quote and exit.
Right.
No one sells a consulting company, but in essence we did, because we morphed the consulting company into a product company.
Right.
So I got that entrepreneurial bug, and that was July of 1999, and it was also the height of the .com boom.
Yeah, it was the perfect time to sell.
Yeah. So what I did is I went around firing my clients, my by the hour consulting clients. And one of them said to me, "Why are you firing us? We pay our bills." I said, "I know." I said, "I'm going to hand you over to a different consultant, but I'm going to go start my own .com." And Sean had no idea what I was going to go start, but I just got the taste of it. And I knew I was never going back. I knew I was never going back to, Wall Street and working, in the enterprise. I knew I was never going back to history and political science for sure. Right? I knew that I had this tech bug, and I knew I had the entrepreneurship bug. So I was, I wasn't even quitting my job. I'd sold my business. And so this company then said to me, well, they were a really small publishing company. They were about 14, I think there were 14 to 16 people. And they said, well, we are going to do a spinoff. And we need young entrepreneurial, because they were older lawyers. They were the older folks. And they said, we need young entrepreneurial people like you to, build this spinoff with us. And then you can go raise venture capital. And I knew nothing about raising capital, but who cares, right? I lied. I'm like, oh yeah, of course, I'm a successful entrepreneur. And then they introduced me to the person who would be my co-founder of this spinoff. And she was hot. Like, she was beautiful. Like, I tell you, I did this all for the wrong reasons. I just wanted to be around her. She was like, I really shouldn't be admitting this in public, but I've admitted it so many times. So.
Oh, okay, good. I wasn't sure if your wife listened to podcasts you were on or not.
Well, I wasn't married to her at the time, so we only got together probably about 5 years after the story. So I'm
that's safe. That's very safe.
Totally safe. Yeah. But it was definitely because there was this very pretty girl that I wanted to work with. And I said, sure, why not? I go, it'd be fun. And she, oh, by the way, I forgot. The other thing about this woman is she was like wicked smart, very successful, and just graduated first in her class in Harvard Business School.
Wow.
So I'm like, I can probably learn from her while I admire her beauty.
Right.
She'll have my undivided attention. So long story short is we go out and raise about $36 million for a spinoff. The company was called Zagat. It's pretty famous, of course, with the restaurant reviews and stuff like that. And, we build out the .com and do all that fun stuff. And, years later, that was, of course, sold off to Google. And again, now that was my first venture-backed company. I was, technically I'm not a co-founder, right? My last name isn't Zagat, but we built this .com from the ground up, right? So it was really from 0 to 60 over, really, really fast. So it was a lot of fun. And then, after that, I did 2 or 3 more startups, and these were real meaning on my own, right? They weren't a spinoff of an existing company, and they were in weird areas. One was in media management, which was measuring advertising spend for companies on the internet, which is still around today. We sold that to a publicly traded company, and it's still going strong. And I coincidentally met with one of our customers yesterday for something. One of the customers of that company yesterday for something completely unrelated to it. And we just reminisced about it.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I did a startup that was about ocean freight containers. So it was like the Expedia.com model for ocean freight. And then we sold that one too. And then some of the same founders of that one and myself got together and built one with the chassis in the ocean freight as well. So we did 2 logistics companies, 1 media company.
Nice.
And then, then eventually found my way to Telerik when they were a really small company. When I bumped into them, they were probably no more than 20 folks, literally in a garage in Eastern Europe. Before they got big, and they said, we're going to go raise a big Series A round, and would love for you to help the company grow. So I said, sure. We went off and raised a big venture round, and then very quickly I got thrown into helping. We acquired a few companies, so I was thrown into that side of the equation after selling a few companies, and I was now on the other side of the table and all of that. So, it's been an interesting and fun ride.
So I'm curious. Do you think that sort of taking the risk and doing your own thing, whether it's an internet startup or a consulting company, do you think that's something that's in someone natively, or do you think that's something that some of our listeners, should take a chance on, assuming it's not, going to make them homeless or lose their wife?
For sure. That is definitely the first piece of advice is, make sure you are ready for jumping in, because the first year won't have, the financial reward. You're just starting out and things like that, unless you're really, really lucky. But to answer your question directly, is it something that people have natively? I think people have an aptitude for it or they don't, because it's a risky proposition.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily mean like people who are into risk are the ones that are going to be natural entrepreneurs, because I'm not a natural risk taker. I mean, I don't go and, juggle flaming, fire sticks or
climb giant. Oh, wait, never mind.
We don't need to talk about that. I was going to say walking on hot coals, but I think you might have been there when I walked on hot coals once at a conference.
I think so. I don't think I was in the room, but at the same place. But
yeah, the bottoms of my feet were black for like 2 days. But I do think it's something that you have an aptitude for or you don't. So I feel that people sometimes are like, I think I really should start a business or start my own consulting company. And if that's what you keep thinking about day after day and come up with excuses not to, my advice is you really need to listen to those inner voices, because you're not going to be satisfied until you don't. Someone once told me, like, the music is playing and you need to eventually listen to the music, because it's going to get louder and louder. That if you don't go into something like that, you're delaying the inevitable.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about this notion? I see 2 kinds of tech entrepreneurs that I run into. Some want to build an exit, right? They want to build something interesting and sort of the serial entrepreneur. And some people want a living. They just don't want a boss. And the boss mentality concerns me, because often, especially with programmers starting consulting companies, they don't realize they're giving up one boss for a dozen bosses or 3 bosses.
Yeah, exactly.
Where do you sit on that? Where this idea of a living versus building a business?
I think if you want to build a lifestyle business, that the quintessential mom and pop, like, for example, there is a yogurt store run by a family. I'm here in Silicon Valley. I live in downtown Menlo Park, and there is a yogurt shop right on Sand Hill Road, and it is run by the family where the 5-year-old kid is running around the shop, and it closes for a week when they go on vacation.
Yeah,
right. That is a family lifestyle business, and you can still do that in technology. And that's fine, but that is a lifestyle choice, not you do that because you want to be able to take more vacation time, and you have a particular skill that people want, and you don't mind running a small business for very little profit, right? You're just running it to pay your bills and to pay your lifestyle. And that's fine. And what you don't get in Mark Zuckerberg billions, you get in, 7 or 8 weeks of vacation compared to the 2 weeks you get, at the regular job, right? Type of a thing.
Absolutely.
And that's perfectly acceptable. But at the same time, if you want to start bringing employees on, and you want to start doing things, like a real business, you have to make that choice. Is this a lifestyle business, or am I going to do this? I'm going to grow this business and build it and have a profit and things like that. And I actually think a few too many people get into entrepreneurship wanting to do it because of the lifestyle. And what I try to tell them as an entrepreneur, having done this 4 times now, you're the guy who buys the toilet paper.
Yeah.
It's not glamorous at all. Actually, being an entrepreneur sucks. Like, it is stressful. It is, you're always trying to raise money. You wake up at night dreaming of ways like, how am I going to make payroll in 2 weeks? And then the check comes eventually that someone owes you money, and you're like, oh, great, I can pay my staff. And some months you don't get paid. In the early days, you do the sweat equity thing. It's hard.
And it's your life, right? I mean, that in many ways, it is your focus while you're building, especially the first 2 or 3 years.
Absolutely. Actually, forever, I think. I mean, I look at the founders of Telerik, because we're 10 years in now at Telerik. I joined early, but I wasn't there at the very beginning. And, it is their lives. I mean, one of the founders of Telerik, his house is painted the Telerik colors. I don't know if that was conscious or subconscious, right? But it does become your life. It's so difficult to have work-life balance when you are the CEO of a business that's yours, it's growing. You have lots of people working for you. I have seen, since I've run an eventually, since I run an accelerator, and I've done it, for Telerik, we've done both AcceleratorHK and Mach 5. Right. I've gotten access to lots of entrepreneurs. Right, we've put probably 30 companies through that accelerator, and then I mentor at the Teal Foundation and at Accelerator, and even at like 500 startups. And I meet a lot of entrepreneurs that like being an entrepreneur. They don't actually like running a business. So they're like telling their friends, I'm a startup guy, because it's cool these days. And those people really piss me off, right? Piss me off is the wrong word, but those people have no business running a business, right? They should go and understand that it's a lifestyle business. And I challenge them really hard. I go, are you really running a business here? Or you just think it's cool to run a business? I go, because when the proverbial what hits the fan, I go, are you just going to duck and run, leave your employees in a lurch and things like that.
And that's unfortunately, I did a few startup Saturdays in Atlanta. I'm sorry, startup weekends. I don't know why I keep on saying Saturdays.
Most of it is a Saturday.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I kept on hearing the same phrase from a bunch of the guys, and a lot of them were people right out of Georgia Tech. And they were, my goal is to raise capital. And it seemed like such a funny goal, because it seemed to be that moment when you were like, oh, you're diluting your share. Your goal is to dilute. You're selling off part of what you are to just build the business. This isn't selling the business. It isn't turning over the business or exiting the business. It's just raising capital and going from 100% ownership to 40% ownership, or whatever the number is. And it's those guys, I think, are those in the same vein of, I want to be known as an entrepreneur, not necessarily a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I think they want to raise capital because that's a sign of success. That's a gate point that they need to do.
Yeah.
I also think some entrepreneurs, less today than it was in 1999, and I think only because it was easier to do so in 1999, wanted to go public because that was the ultimate validation of their entrepreneurial success.
Yeah.
And then of course there's wealth that comes with that. If you've maneuvered correctly, you probably still own a decent chunk of the company.
Right.
And that is a lot of people. And I look at companies a lot of times and I ask them when they're raising money, I go, what's the money for? And then of course they try to give me some kind of pro forma or financial statement. I go, no. I don't care, like in month 12, how many pencils you're going to buy. I said, what's the money really for? Right. I go, is it to grow? Right. And if it's to grow, is it like a marketing thing? Is it because you have to hire enterprise salespeople? And like at Telerik, we took money in order to build out. At the time, we sold. I mean, it was a very successful use of venture capital. It could be done as a case study. At Telerik, we took venture capital about 6 years ago when most of our sales were to guys like you, individual developers or running small consulting shops. Now, while we still sell tons and tons to guys like you and more guys like you, our typical customer is like a big bank, or if we work with 450 out of the Fortune 500, right? Big enterprise sales. So we had to build software that could be an enterprise sale. We had to build a services team, and we had to build an enterprise sales team all around that, right? And that was the appropriate and responsible use of venture capital, as opposed to, I think, a lot of people that like, we're going to have a launch party. And I'm like, okay.
I was part of a going public years ago. I guess it was 98. And when they got their money, we all got new fancy cubes, and they got a $100,000 table in the conference room, and I was baffled by it. I was like, this
Like, where
seems
is this?
the opposite of what we could be spending money on. There's no way we're ever going to, the stock price is never going to raise if we're not using this to make sales. No one's going to go, oh, that's a very valued company because they have a really nice oak desk.
Exactly. Or they have a Herman Miller chair.
Exactly. Same problem, Of course, in 98, it was, it was a little too easy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And to be honest, we fell a little bit into that trap at Zagat. It just happened, right? We got the desks and the chairs too and all that fun stuff because that's what everyone else was doing. And
it's easy to sort of fool yourself into saying, oh, this means we'll be able to bring in bigger clients, and these are the guys we need to impress, and walk them through the tech room, and it'll look right. And whereas at the end of the day, hiring 10 really good salespeople is much better than half of a conference table.
Right, exactly. 100% correct. And I actually think it's pretty cool when you walk into one of these places and people are sitting on the floors and people are, they're not worried about the aesthetic. It's just the whole legend at Amazon, they take doors, right, and make them into desks, right?
Same thing we did when we were out of college.
Exactly.
If you look back at, kind of your career so far, are there things you would have changed? I mean, you sound like you've had a great ride, but I wonder if there are decisions you would feel like, I don't want to say regret it. I don't think it's that level, that things you would, left turn you wish you would have taken.
Very little, to be honest, but there's definitely a part of me that during the years. Well, let me take a step back. Is during the years that I, 9 to 5 and then trying to run the business, nights and weekends, so to speak.
Right.
I wished that maybe I had more of a computer science background in university.
Sure.
But I said, I don't necessarily regret that because I think the social science background that I did get helped me run a business.
Right.
So I don't think I'd be where I am if I didn't have that social science background. Now that I'm doing more things like corporate development and corporate strategy, and, God forbid, I'm even doing marketing. I went to this Microsoft event the other day, partner summit, and they had 2 tracks, technical and marketing. And then I went to one of the marketing sessions. I go, what happened? How am I going to a marketing session? I go, who am I? But I wish that maybe I had a little bit more background in that. But I did go back and get an MBA. I said, I need to, because I definitely have the equivalent of a computer science degree, probably master's by now. So I went out and augmented those technical skills with a business degree. And that was mostly because I didn't want to be, quote, the tech guy. Like, I've watched marketing and business people when you're in the room I was a CTO of many companies, and you start weighing in on pricing of a product. And then they say, no, Steve, you're the tech guy. Right. So I really got a business degree so I can say the following thing. When I was in business school, right. Or a friend of mine from business school, mostly just to be part of that conversation. I don't necessarily recommend that to everybody. I don't think it's necessary unless you want to be a senior executive at a tech company and you want the business people to take you seriously, then I would recommend it. Other than that, it's not necessary.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Right. Well, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, well, it was awesome to be here.
You enjoy. When's the trip this year? April?
No, well, we just did the trip. We just came back, so we did it in May, and we were in the Annapurna circuit.
Nice. Well, I hope that everything goes well with you, and enjoy the sunny California, and we'll talk again.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Hello World podcast. Remember, you can subscribe to the Hello World podcast